There are moments in our country's history when the air feels heavy, when the truth hovers just above us, waiting for someone brave enough to say it out loud. And that day was one of those moments. The Adhoc committee room was packed. Journalists, politicians, law experts, all seated, eyes locked on one man, General Sibiya. Once hailed as a hero, a man who stood tall against crime, corruption, and the shadows that haunt our justice system. But as he walked in that morning, there was something different in his eyes. Not the confidence of a man certain of his innocence. No, it was the look of a man ready to rewrite his own story, even if it meant tearing down the very image he built. The microphones were switched on. The cameras rolled. And as his voice echoed through the hall, you could feel it. This was not just testimony. This was a confession dressed as a defense, because sometimes you don't need an enemy to destroy you. Sometimes all it takes is your own words, spoken under oath, broadcast to a nation desperate for answers. The committee chair tried to keep order, but tension danced in the air. Every sentence from Sibiya's mouth seemed to twist around itself, defensive, proud, uncertain. He wasn't just being questioned by Parliament. He was being questioned by the ghosts of his own past decisions. And maybe, deep down, he knew it. He knew that the very institution he once served faithfully, the justice system, was now a mirror reflecting his own contradictions. This was no ordinary hearing. This was a public autopsy of integrity, where every statement cut deeper. Every denial sounded like an admission, and every pause carried the weight of truth unsaid. As I watched, I realized something profound. In that room, power had no uniform. It had no rank. It was fragile, trembling, gasping for relevance. And the man once seen as untouchable was suddenly human, flawed, cornered. A soldier of justice now fighting to justify his own version of it. The stage was set. The audience was ready. And before the day would end, the same man who once hunted corruption would stand accused by his own conscience. The hero. We thought we knew, before the cracks appeared, before the contradictions began to echo through the committee chambers. There was a story of a man the nation once believed in. They called him General Sibiya, the fearless investigator. A man who rose through the ranks, chasing justice like a soldier on a battlefield. He was sharp, relentless, and unafraid to confront power, or so we thought. We wanted to believe in him. We needed to believe that someone, somewhere inside this broken system, was still pure. Because in a country drowning in scandal and political rot, a hero is not just a person, it's a lifeline. And for years, Sibiya wore that badge of honor proudly. He became the face of accountability, the man who spoke truth when others hid behind silence. The one who promised, no one is above the law, but here's the problem with heroes. Sometimes they start believing in their own myth. The same man who once exposed others began to build his own fortress of untouchability. The same voice that demanded answers began to master the art of deflection. And slowly, quietly, the line between justice and ambition blurred. Behind the camera flashes, there were whispers. Behind the headlines of bravery, there were deals, favors, and friends in high places. The kind of connections that don't just protect you, they own you. But to the public, he was still the symbol of reform. A man who spoke of ethics while walking on ground paved by secrets. And that's the cruel thing about truth. It never stays buried. It waits, patiently, until the right moment, the right hearing, to explode in plain sight. When General Sibiya took that seat before the ad hoc committee, he wasn't just defending his actions. He was defending an illusion, one carefully crafted by years of public trust and political theater. And as the questions started cutting deeper, you could see it. The hero we thought we knew was slipping away. Bit by bit, word by word. Maybe the real tragedy isn't that he changed. Maybe the tragedy is that we ever believed he couldn't. The web of power. Power. It's never just a title. It's a network. Invis reads binding favors, silence, and survival. And inside that web, no one is truly clean. For years, General Sibiya operated inside this network, a place where justice is a language spoken only by those who can afford to define it. He wasn't alone. Behind every case, every raid, every televised speech, there were shadows pulling strings. Advisors, politicians, businessmen, all orbiting around the same promise: protection in exchange for loyalty. And that's the secret the committee could never write into its minutes. Power doesn't corrupt overnight. It seduces slowly. A favor here, a phone call there, a file that disappears, a name that suddenly becomes untouchable. You start believing you're part of something bigger, a movement, a mission, a patriotic cause, but in truth, you're just another pawn guarding someone else's king. That's the tragedy of men like Sibiya. They don't wake up wanting to betray justice. They simply start believing they are justice. So when the ad hoc committee began probing his decisions, when questions about selective investigations and sudden silences surfaced, the web began to tremble, because for every question he dodged, there was a name behind it. For every document he claimed was missing, there was a story of who made it disappear. And for every moment he said, I was only following orders, there was someone, somewhere, smiling in the shadows. You see, power doesn't only corrupt individuals. It infects systems. It rewards those who obey and buries those who question. And in that room, as he tried to keep his composure, you could see the weight of every favor he ever owed pressing down on him. The web he once used to climb was now closing in. And the more he spoke, the more the audience realized. This wasn't a man being betrayed by the system. This was the system revealing itself through him. The testimony began. The room fell silent. Every eye fixed on him. Every microphone poised. And as General Sibiya opened his mouth, the weight of the nation pressed down on his words. He began confidently, reciting dates, explaining procedures, naming names. At first, it sounded like the Sibiya we thought we knew, the sharp, meticulous, untouchable investigator. But then, something subtle shifted. A hesitation, a stumble over a detail, a glance away, the kind of small, almost invisible moment that speaks louder than any headline. And with each answer, contradictions began to appear. Statements that clashed with past records, actions that didn't match intentions, allegiances that seemed convenient. He tried to maintain control. He tried to steer the narrative. But the harder he pushed, the more the cracks widened. Because here's the truth. When you stand before the nation under oath and you are forced to confront the sum of your choices, words become weapons. Words become mirrors. And mirrors don't lie. By the halfway point of his testimony, the committee members were leaning in. The journalists were scribbling furiously. And the nation was watching every twitch, every pause, every carefully chosen phrase, and that's when it happened. The first admission slipped through. Not in confession, but in contradiction. Not in guilt, but in the reality of being human under scrutiny. The mask that had protected him for years was cracking. And the audience realized something chilling. The testimony wasn't just about facts. It was about truth exposing itself, whether he wanted it to or not. The turning point. It was inevitable. The more questions came, the less control he had. The more he spoke, the harder it became to maintain the facade. General Sibiya had trained for this moment his entire career. He knew the rules, the protocols, the scripts, but no training could prepare him for the power of truth exposed under public scrutiny. And then it happened. A question about a decision, a file, a missed report. A question that forced him to reconcile his words with undeniable facts. He paused. He swallowed. And for the first time, the confidence cracked. There was a flicker of doubt in his eyes, a tremor in his voice, and in that instant you could see it. The man who once commanded authority was now wrestling with the weight of his own contradictions. He deflected, he justified, he rationalized, but each explanation created more questions. Each denial revealed a deeper inconsistency. It was no longer a testimony. It was a performance, a struggle between self-preservation and the unavoidable reality of accountability. Not loud, not theatrical, and then came the emotion. Not loud, not theatrical, but subtle. A pause, a sigh, a fleeting flash of frustration, maybe even regret. The committee noticed, the cameras noticed, and the nation watching at home began to sense it too. This was the turning point. The moment when a man's carefully constructed image began to unravel, live in front of the entire country, because the truth has a way of seeping through the smallest cracks. And once it does, there's no stopping it. By the end of this chapter in the hearing, the general was no longer just defending himself. He was confronting a reality he could not control, the reality that his words could betray him more than any enemy ever could. The shadow of fear. Fear is a strange thing. It doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers. And in that committee room, it was whispering. General Sibiya had always commanded respect. His presence was authority incarnate. But as contradictions surfaced, even he began to feel it, that creeping, inescapable fear that comes when the walls of power close in. The committee noticed it first, a slight hesitation, a flicker of discomfort. the subtle shuffle of papers. These were not mistakes. These were human responses to the weight of exposure. And then came the whispers among the observers. Who was protecting whom? Who had influence over what? Alliances shifted under the pressure, some visible, others invisible. Inside the shadows of the room, politics danced. Deals, favors, and loyalties all began to reveal themselves. The very network that had once protected him now trembled. Every question asked, every pause, every careful word. It wasn't just about Sibiya anymore. It was about the system watching itself in real time. And fear, real fear, is contagious. It spread across the room like a slow-burning fire. Committee members glanced at one another, weighing what to push and what to hold back. Journalists sensed the drama and sharpened their pens. And General Sibiya felt the net tightening around him. This was more than testimony. It was a battlefield. A clash between personal survival and public accountability. Every glance, every sentence, every hesitation was a move in a dangerous game, and in that moment it became clear. The shadow of fear was no longer just his. It had reached everyone in the room. Everyone was watching. Everyone was calculating. And the consequences of one man's contradictions were larger than anyone had imagined. The public awakening. News travels fast. But truth? Truth has a way of exploding. As General Sibiya's testimony unfolded, word of the contradictions and evasions began to spread. Social media erupted. Commentators debated. Every citizen with a phone became a witness. The questions that once seemed confined to the committee chamber now reached living rooms across the nation. People began to ask, what did we really know? Who can we trust? Was the system we relied on truly serving justice, or something else entirely? And for the first time, the audience wasn't just observing. They were participating, analyzing every clip, every pause, every statement. They were connecting dots the committee couldn't even see yet. The narrative shifted. It was no longer about a single man's defense. It was about accountability, integrity, the fragile balance of power and the responsibility of every official in the system. And as the nation woke up to what had been unfolding behind closed doors, something remarkable happened. Pressure began to build. Questions became demands. Denials lost their power. The public was no longer silent. It's one thing to face a committee. It's another to face an entire country. Every contradiction, every deflection, every lapse in composure became magnified under the collective gaze of the people. And in that awakening, the general was no longer just a man defending himself. He had become a symbol, a mirror reflecting the flaws, the fears, and the fragility of the system itself. The nation was watching, the world was watching, and the story was no longer his alone. The reckoning. For General Sibiya, the day of reckoning had arrived. The contradictions, the evasions, the subtle shifts in tone and gaze, they all converged in this moment under the unflinching eyes of the committee, the cameras, and the nation. He had tried to control the narrative. He had tried to defend himself with words, with logic, with authority. But words are fragile things, and when they collide with reality, they can betray even the most careful speaker. The committee pressed harder. Questions cut deeper. And for the first time, the general's armor began to crumble completely. Every answer he gave exposed another gap, another inconsistency, another silent truth. And in that silence, between the words, the reckoning became clear. It was never just about him. It was about the system, about the culture of loyalty and fear, about the fragile trust the public places in those who hold power. Because truth is relentless. It doesn't bend to authority. It doesn't hide behind titles. And it certainly doesn't forgive those who think they can manipulate it. By the end of the day, the mask was gone. Not in dramatic confession, not in shouted admission, but in the quiet, undeniable reality of contradictions laid bare. The general was no longer simply defending himself. He was confronting the consequences of his own words, the shadow of every decision, every compromise, every lapse in judgment. And the audience, the nation, we were all witnesses, witnesses to a moment that revealed the fragile truth. No power is absolute, no story is untouchable, and no man is beyond the reach of accountability. When the microphones went silent and the committee adjourned, one thing was clear: the answers never matched the questions. Instead of clarity, the final day of Sibiya's testimony left shadows, shadows of doubt, secrecy, and unfinished truth. Was this a defense or a performance? The final judgment, South Africa, is yours. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for the next episode, where we uncover what really happened behind those closed doors. Thanks for watching. Bye.